Urgent humanitarian appeal for the immediate release of Pastor Jeon Kwang-hoon, day 79 of imprisonment. Dear Coach Tuberville, I am writing to you from Daejeon, Republic of Korea, with the deepest urgency and most heartfelt plea. My name is Kim Sun-gi. I am 49 years old, a Methodist elder at Daejeon Jeil Methodist Church, and a social welfare administrator who has spent 8 years caring for the elderly at Udong Senior Welfare Center. I also operate Sun Patriot TV, a YouTube channel with over 7,200 subscribers dedicated to promoting the U.S. Korea alliance and Christian values. Coach Tuberville, this letter is the 26th international letter I have dispatched in my campaign to secure the release of Pastor Jeon Kwang-hoon. Today, April 1, 2026, marks the 79th day of his imprisonment. Since January 20th, I have written to Senator Lindsey Graham, Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, President Donald Trump, and most recently, Senator Ashley Moody of Florida. Not a single response has come, not one acknowledgement that an innocent man of God is dying in a Korean prison while the world remains silent. I am writing to you, Coach Tuberville, because you are different. You are a man who has spent 40 years leading teams to victory. You understand what it means to fight when the odds are against you. You led Auburn to an undefeated 13-0 season in 2004. You defeated Alabama 6 consecutive times, the longest winning streak in that rivalry since 1982. You are one of the top 50 winningest college football coaches of all time. But more than your victories on the field, you are known for your unwavering principles. In 2023, you single-handedly blocked over 450 military promotions for 10 months to defend the sanctity of life. You stood alone against the entire establishment, enduring relentless criticism, because you believed it was the right thing to do. Pastor Jeon Kwang-hoon is the same kind of man. For 7 years, he stood alone in Gwanghwamun Square, leading hundreds of thousands in peaceful rallies for freedom, democracy, and the U.S. Korea alliance. He was arrested 3 times under the Moon Jae-in administration and charged with 76 criminal counts. Every single charge resulted in acquittal. Not guilty on all 76 counts. Yet now, under President Lee Jae-myung, the same pattern of persecution has resumed. Pastor Jeon was arrested on January 13, 2026, and has been denied bail despite suffering from catastrophic health conditions that require immediate medical intervention. Coach Tuberville, I am begging you to hear this plea. An innocent servant of God is dying in prison. His only crime was speaking out for the values you yourself hold dear: faith, family, freedom, and the alliance between our 2 nations that your father's generation fought to protect. Why I am writing to you your father's legacy. Coach Tuberville, I know about your father, Charles Orr Tuberville Jr. He was a World War II veteran who participated in the D-Day landings at Normandy. He received the Purple Heart for wounds suffered in combat. He was one of the brave men who liberated Europe from tyranny and helped establish the free world order that exists today. Your father's sacrifice is the reason you have dedicated so much of your life to serving veterans and military families. It is why you sit on the Senate Armed Services Committee and the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee. It is why you have said, "My father was a decorated World War II veteran and Purple Heart recipient." Which is why I am so passionate about ensuring veterans have access to timely and quality care. Coach Tuberville, the nation your father's generation fought to protect includes the Republic of Korea. In the Korean War, 36,574 American soldiers gave their lives on the Korean peninsula. Their blood is in our soil. Their sacrifice is the foundation of our freedom. The U.S. Korea alliance, now 70 years strong, is the living legacy of that sacrifice. Pastor Jeon Kwang-hoon has been the most vocal defender of that alliance in South Korea. At every rally in Gwanghwamun Square, the American flag flew alongside the Korean flag. Pastor Jeon called the U.S. Korea alliance our lifeline. He praised President Trump as a leader sent by God. He organized the largest pro-American rallies in Korean history. And now, this man who honored your father's legacy by defending the alliance that American blood secured is rotting in a Korean prison. He is there because he spoke out against a president who seeks to dismantle that very alliance. The Lee Jae-myung administration is pursuing policies that would abolish the national security law, accelerate the transfer of wartime operational control, withdraw U.S. troops from Korea, and dissolve the Combined Forces Command. These are precisely the outcomes that China desires. And the most prominent voice opposing these policies has been silenced by imprisonment. Coach Tuberville, your father did not bleed on the beaches of Normandy, so that allies of America could be persecuted for defending the alliances his generation built. I implore you to honor his memory by speaking out for Pastor Jeon Kwang-hoon. Why I am writing to you the courage to stand alone. Coach Tuberville, in 2023, you did something that few in Washington have the courage to do. You stood alone on principle, knowing you would face overwhelming opposition. For 10 months, you single-handedly blocked over 450 senior military promotions to protest the Department of Defense's policy of funding travel for service members seeking abortions. The media attacked you, your colleagues pressured you, the Secretary of the Navy, the Secretary of the Air Force, and the Secretary of the Army, published an editorial calling your actions a threat to national security. But you did not yield. You declared, I believe in God. I believe in the sanctity of life. I believe in giving everybody the opportunity to live that life. You understood that some principles are worth fighting for, even when you fight alone, even when the cost is immense. Pastor Jeon Kwang-hoon is that kind of man. For 7 years, from 2019 to 2026, he stood in Gwanghwamun Square and raised his voice against 2 presidential administrations that sought to undermine Korean democracy and the U.S.-Korea alliance. He was arrested 3 times under President Moon Jae-in. He was charged with 76 criminal counts, yet he refused to be silent. When every charge resulted in acquittal, he continued to speak. When the Lee Jae-myung administration arrested him again on January 13, 2026, he was already suffering from debilitating health conditions that would have broken most men. On March 28, 2026, just 4 days ago, Pastor Jeon's attorney, Kang Yun-jae, visited him in detention and reported Pastor Jeon is currently in extremely difficult circumstances. But he is enduring by relying solely on the Lord and giving thanks in all things. He has transcended the human condition. Coach Tuberville, this is a man whose body is failing him, who has 3 metal rods in his spine, who cannot control his bladder, who must have food fed to him by his wife because he can barely walk. Yet his spirit remains unbroken. He gives thanks in all things. He has transcended the human condition. You know what it means to stand alone for principle. You know the cost. Pastor Jeon Kwang-hoon has paid that cost for 7 years. Now he is paying it with his health, possibly with his life. Will you stand with him? Why I am writing to you, a fellow Christian. Coach Tuberville, you are a member of the Church of Christ. Your faith has guided your entire life, from your days coaching at Auburn, where you established a team chaplaincy program, to your service in the Senate, where you have openly declared your Christian convictions. You have said, as a Christian, I believe life begins at conception. As an American, I believe every life has constitutional protections. Pastor Jeon Kwang-hoon has devoted more than 50 years to the gospel of Jesus Christ. He is the senior pastor of Sarangjel Church in Seoul, one of the largest congregations in Korea. He served as the president of the Christian Council of Korea (CCK), the largest Protestant federation in the nation, representing thousands of churches and millions of believers. His entire life has been dedicated to the salvation of souls and the spiritual awakening of the Korean people. And now, this servant of God is being persecuted for his faith. On January 21, 2026, President Lee Jae-myung declared at a press conference, "The involvement of religion in politics is the path to national ruin, and it must be completely uprooted." He used the word uprooted, the language of extermination, the language of persecution. He further stated using religious systems as political tools is absolutely unacceptable. It is like giving someone a gun to defend the nation and having them turn it on the people. He compared pastors who engage in political speech to armed traitors. President Lee then declared some Protestants should also be investigated, should they not? It seems natural that they should be investigated. He designated Protestant churches as a category to be investigated, without any specific evidence of wrongdoing, simply because they have engaged in political expression. Coach Tuberville, this is religious persecution. A head of state has declared that religion must be uprooted from politics. He has compared religious leaders to armed traitors. He has called for the investigation of an entire religious denomination, and the most prominent Protestant leader in the nation, Pastor Jeon Kwang-hoon, has been imprisoned. Your brother in Christ is suffering because of his faith. Will you speak for him? From one coach to another. Coach Tuberville, you know what it takes to lead a team to victory. In 2004, you led Auburn to a perfect 13-0 season, winning the SEC Championship and the Sugar Bowl. You were named AP Coach of the Year, Paul Bear Bryant Coach of the Year, Walter Camp Coach of the Year, and Sporting News Coach of the Year. You defeated Alabama 6 consecutive times, breaking their dominance and establishing Auburn as a powerhouse. You retired as one of the top 50 winningest coaches in college football history. But your greatest achievement was not the victories themselves. It was what you instilled in your players: discipline, teamwork, perseverance, and faith. You brought chaplains to your teams at every program you led. You understood that football was more than a game, it was a training ground for life. Pastor Jeon Kwang-hoon is also a coach. For 7 years, he led hundreds of thousands of Koreans in Gwanghwamun Square. His rallying cry was, "Let us unite. Let us fight. Let us win." This is the language of a coach. This is the language of a leader who inspires his team to achieve what seems impossible. And like you, Coach Tuberville, Pastor Jeon led his team to victory through peaceful means. 7 years of rallies involving hundreds of thousands of participants, and not a single incident of violence. Zero violence. The rallies featured hymns, prayers, the Lord's Prayer, the Korean national anthem, and the American national anthem. They waved Korean flags and American flags side by side. This was not a mob. This was a disciplined team, led by a coach who believed in peaceful protest. Yet this coach is now imprisoned for inciting insurrection. A man who organized 7 years of peaceful rallies with zero violence is accused of inciting violence. This is like accusing a coach of deliberately injuring players when his entire career has been defined by protecting them. It is absurd. It is unjust. It is persecution. Coach Tuberville, I am asking you to recognize a fellow coach who is being unjustly benched. Pastor Jeon's team, the hundreds of thousands who rallied for freedom, needs him back on the field. Korea needs him. The U.S. Korea Alliance needs him. Will you help get him back in the game? Who is Pastor Jeon Kwang-hoon? Pastor Jeon Kwang-hoon was born on March 28, 1956, and is currently 69 years old. He has devoted more than 50 years of his life to Christian ministry, serving as the senior pastor of Sarangjel Church in Seoul, one of the largest Protestant congregations in Korea. He also served as the president of the Christian Council of Korea (CCK), the nation's largest Protestant federation, representing thousands of churches and millions of believers across the country. Beginning in 2019, Pastor Jeon organized weekly rallies in Gwanghwamun Square, the symbolic heart of Seoul, located near the former presidential residence and major government buildings. These rallies advocated for traditional Christian values, a strong U.S. Korea alliance, and opposition to what Pastor Jeon viewed as pro-North Korean policies of the Moon Jae-in and Lee Jae-myung administrations. The rallies were characterized by their peaceful nature. Participants sang hymns, recited the Lord's Prayer, waved Korean and American flags, and listened to speeches calling for national unity and alliance solidarity. Over 7 years of continuous rallies involving hundreds of thousands of participants, there was not a single incident of violence attributable to the organizers or participants. This remarkable record of peaceful assembly stands in stark contrast to the charges of inciting insurrection that have been leveled against Pastor Jeon. Pastor Jeon was a vocal supporter of President Donald Trump, whom he described as a leader sent by God to protect freedom. He consistently advocated for the strengthening of the U.S. Korea alliance and opposed policies that he believed would weaken Korea's security relationship with the United States. His pro-American stance made him a target for administrations that sought closer ties with North Korea and China, at the expense of the traditional alliance with America. Under the Moon Jae-in administration 2017 to 2022, Pastor Jeon was arrested 3 times and charged with a total of 76 criminal counts, ranging from election law violations to public safety offenses. Every single charge resulted in acquittal. Korean courts found that the prosecutions were politically motivated, that evidence was insufficient, and that the charges were fundamentally unjust. This pattern of arrest, prosecution, and acquittal demonstrates a clear campaign of political persecution rather than legitimate law enforcement. The current imprisonment. On January 13, 2026, Pastor Jeon Kwang-hoon was arrested by authorities under the Lee Jae-myung administration. The prosecution initially sought an arrest warrant that was rejected by the court due to insufficient evidence. However, following what appears to be political pressure, a second warrant was approved, and Pastor Jeon was taken into custody. The charges against Pastor Jeon are remarkably similar to those that resulted in his complete acquittal under the previous administration. Allegations of inciting insurrection and violating public safety through his organization of political rallies. It is critical to note that Shin Hae-sik, another prominent figure charged in the same case, was not detained but was instead released with a summons to appear. The selective detention of Pastor Jeon, while releasing others charged with identical offenses, strongly suggests that his imprisonment is politically targeted rather than legally justified. On February 27, 2026, at the first court hearing, presiding Judge Park Ji-won publicly criticized the prosecution's case. The judge noted that the charges were unclear, that the specific perpetrators had not been identified, and that the causal relationship between Pastor Jeon's actions and any alleged harm had not been established. This public criticism from the bench is highly unusual in the Korean judicial system, and indicates serious doubts about the legitimacy of the prosecution's case. Despite these judicial concerns, Pastor Jeon remains in detention. His attorneys have filed for bail, citing his catastrophic health conditions, but the court has repeatedly postponed its decision. As of April 1, 2026, Pastor Jeon has been imprisoned for 79 days, and his health continues to deteriorate in custody. The next court hearing is scheduled for April 17, 2026. Without international intervention, there is a very real possibility that Pastor Jeon will die in prison before his case is resolved. The denial of bail for a 69-year-old man, with multiple serious health conditions, facing charges that have previously resulted in complete acquittal, constitutes a severe violation of human rights and due process. A medical emergency. The coach is collapsing on the field. Coach Tuberville, I must now describe to you the most urgent aspect of this case: Pastor Jeon's health. This is not merely a matter of legal injustice. This is a matter of life and death. Pastor Jeon suffers from ossification of the posterior longitudinal ligament (OPLL), a progressive spinal condition. He has undergone 3 separate cervical spine surgeries. 3 metal rods have been implanted in his neck to stabilize his spine. X-ray images, which I have attached to this letter, clearly show the metal hardware in his cervical vertebrae. But the spinal condition is only part of his medical crisis. Pastor Jeon has completely lost bladder function. He must use a catheter device to forcibly drain his bladder multiple times per day. He suffers from severe mobility impairment so profound that his wife must feed him by hand because he can barely lift his arms to eat. He also suffers from long-term diabetes and hypothyroidism, both of which require ongoing medical management. His defense attorneys filed for bail, stating to the court the defendant has undergone 3 surgeries and has 3 metal rods implanted in his neck. His wife must feed him by hand due to severe mobility impairment. He has also lost bladder function and must use a drainage device multiple times daily to forcibly expel urine. Despite this desperate plea, the court has repeatedly delayed its decision on bail. Coach Tuberville, you know what happens when a player collapses on the field. The game stops. Medical personnel rush in. The player's safety takes priority over everything else. But in Pastor Jeon's case, the game continues while he collapses. The court refuses to stop the proceedings to ensure his safety. This is not justice. This is cruelty. On March 28, 2026, attorney Kang Yun-jae visited Pastor Jeon in detention and reported Pastor Jeon is currently in extremely difficult circumstances, but he is enduring by relying solely on the Lord and giving thanks in all things. He has transcended the human condition. This is the testimony of a man who is suffering beyond what most humans can endure, yet maintains his faith and dignity. But even the strongest spirit inhabits a mortal body. If Pastor Jeon dies in prison, the Korean government will be responsible for his death, and the international community will have been complicit through its silence. The Tyranny of Lee Jae-myung Part 1 Declaration of Religious Persecution. Coach Tuberville, to understand why Pastor Jeon is in prison, you must understand the nature of the Lee Jae-myung administration. What is happening in South Korea is not ordinary political disagreement, it is the systematic dismantling of democratic institutions by a president, who is himself facing 5 criminal trials that have been suspended due to his office. On January 21, 2026, President Lee Jae-myung held a press conference in which he made statements that constitute an open declaration of religious persecution. He stated the involvement of religion in politics is the path to national ruin, and it must be completely uprooted. The word he used, uprooted, is the language of extermination. It is not the language of democratic governance. It is the language of a persecutor. President Lee continued using religious systems as political tools is absolutely unacceptable. It is like giving someone a gun to defend the nation and having them turn it on the people. In this statement, the President of South Korea compared religious leaders who engage in political speech to armed traitors who turn their weapons on civilians. This is not political rhetoric. This is incitement to persecution. President Lee then stated some Protestants should also be investigated, should they not? It seems natural that they should be investigated. He designated Protestant churches as a category to be investigated, not specific individuals suspected of specific crimes, but an entire religious denomination singled out for government scrutiny simply because some of its members have expressed political views. Finally, President Lee articulated what can only be described as a strategy of targeted elimination when plowing a field. You remove the large stones first, then the small ones. Pastor Jeon Kwang-hoon is the large stone. He is the most prominent Protestant leader in South Korea, the former president of the Christian Council of Korea, the organizer of the largest pro-American rallies in Korean history. By imprisoning him, President Lee sends a message to every other religious leader: speak out, and you will be next. The large stone is removed first, then the small stones follow. The Tyranny of Lee Jae-myung Part 2 Capturing the Judiciary. Coach Tuberville, President Lee Jae-myung was facing 5 criminal trials when he was elected president. These trials included charges of election law violations, perjury, subornation, the Daejang-dong real estate corruption scandal, illegal remittances to North Korea, and misuse of government funds. On May 1, 2025, the Supreme Court of Korea issued a ruling in his election law case that overturned his acquittal and remanded the case for retrial, with instructions that strongly suggested he should be found guilty. Rather than face these trials, President Lee has systematically restructured the Korean judicial system to escape accountability. Immediately after taking office, all 5 of his criminal trials were suspended under Article 84 of the Korean Constitution, which provides sitting presidents with immunity from prosecution. But President Lee went further. He and his party have passed 3 laws that legal experts describe as the destruction of judicial independence in South Korea. First, the 4-trial system Constitutional Court Appeals Law, passed on February 27, 2026. This law allows Supreme Court decisions to be appealed to the Constitutional Court. Chief Justice Cho Hee-dae warned that this fundamentally changes 80 years of judicial foundation. The Supreme Court stated the separation of powers and judicial independence that we have enjoyed under the 1987 Constitution may disappear into the dustbin of history. Second, the Supreme Court Justice Expansion Law, passed on February 28, 2026. This law increases the number of Supreme Court justices from 14 to 26. Under this expansion, President Lee will appoint 22 of the 26 justices during his term, 85% of the court. This is court packing of the kind that would make Franklin Roosevelt blush. President Lee is creating a Supreme Court that will rule in his favor on any case, including the criminal cases against him that are currently suspended. Third, the Law Distortion Crime Law, passed on February 26, 2026. This law allows the prosecution of judges and prosecutors who distort the law in their rulings or investigations. Critics have noted that this law is designed to punish the prosecutors who investigated President Lee and the judges who ruled against him. It creates a chilling effect on judicial independence. Any judge who rules against the government risks criminal prosecution. Coach Tuberville, this is what dictators do. They capture the courts. They punish judges who rule against them. They create legal systems that serve their personal interests rather than justice. President Lee is transforming South Korea from a democracy into an authoritarian state. And the man who most vocally opposed this transformation, Pastor Jeon Kwang-hoon, is rotting in prison. The Tyranny of Lee Jae-myung Part 3. Dismantling the U.S. Korea Alliance. Coach Tuberville, as a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, you understand the strategic importance of the U.S. Korea Alliance. You represent Alabama, home to Redstone Arsenal and the future headquarters of U.S. Space Command. You have fought to bring Space Command to Huntsville, and you have succeeded thanks to President Trump's restoration of merit to the process. You understand that American security depends on strong alliances in the Pacific. The Lee Jae-myung administration is pursuing 5 policies that would systematically dismantle the U.S. Korea Alliance. First, abolition of the National Security Law. This law has been the foundation of South Korea's defense against North Korean infiltration and espionage since 1948. The Lee administration seeks to abolish it, which would legalize pro-North Korean activities and organizations. Second, accelerated transfer of wartime operational control. The Lee administration seeks to accelerate the transfer of wartime command authority from the U.S. to Korea before conditions are met, weakening the unified command structure that has deterred North Korean aggression for 7 decades. Third, withdrawal of U.S. forces. Korea elements within the Lee administration have called for the withdrawal of the 28,500 U.S. troops stationed in Korea, which would fundamentally alter the security balance on the Korean peninsula. Fourth, dissolution of the Combined Forces Command. The CFC, which integrates U.S. and Korean military forces under a unified command structure, would be dismantled, ending the military integration that has been the backbone of alliance deterrence. Fifth, dissolution of the Defense Security Command. This military intelligence agency, responsible for counterespionage within the Korean armed forces, would be abolished, leaving the Korean military vulnerable to infiltration. Coach Tuberville, these 5 policies represent exactly what China wants. They would weaken American presence in the Pacific, undermine the alliance your father's generation built, and shift the balance of power toward Beijing. Pastor Jeon Kwang-hoon opposed these policies. That is why he is in prison. The most pro-American voice in South Korea has been silenced to pave the way for anti-American policies. The international significance of this case. Coach Tuberville, the imprisonment of Pastor Jeon Kwang-hoon is not merely a Korean domestic matter. It has profound implications for American interests in the Indo-Pacific region and for the global cause of religious freedom. First, this case affects the credibility of American alliances. South Korea has been one of America's most important allies in Asia for 70 years. If the United States remains silent while an ally imprisons a prominent pro-American religious leader for his political views, what message does that send to other allies? It suggests that America will not stand by those who stand by America. It weakens the credibility of American security guarantees throughout the region. Second, this case affects the balance of power in Northeast Asia. Pastor Jeon was the most vocal opponent of policies that would distance South Korea from the United States and move it closer to China's orbit. His silencing removes a major obstacle to the realignment of Korean foreign policy away from America. This directly affects American strategic interests in containing Chinese expansion. Third, this case affects religious freedom worldwide. The United States has historically been the world's leading advocate for religious freedom. When the president of an allied nation declares that religion must be uprooted from politics, compares religious leaders to armed traitors, and imprisons the most prominent Protestant leader in the country, America's silence constitutes a betrayal of its foundational commitment to religious liberty. Fourth, this case affects the global perception of American values. President Trump has spoken repeatedly about the importance of defending persecuted Christians worldwide. Vice President Vance has been a vocal advocate for religious liberty. If the Trump administration remains silent while a Christian pastor who praised President Trump and supported American policies is persecuted by an allied government, it undermines the administration's credibility on religious freedom issues globally. Coach Tuberville, you sit on the Senate Armed Services Committee. You understand military alliances. You understand strategic positioning. You understand that America's strength depends on the credibility of its commitments. Speaking out for Pastor Jeon Kwang-hoon is not only the right thing to do morally, it is the right thing to do strategically. It demonstrates that America stands by those who stand by America. A biblical appeal. Coach Tuberville, as a fellow Christian, I appeal to you through Scripture. Proverbs 318-9 commands: speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly, defend the rights of the poor and needy. Pastor Jeon cannot speak for himself. He is imprisoned, his health failing, his voice silenced. You have a platform, you have a voice. You have the ability to speak for him. Matthew 2535-36 teaches, for I was hungry and you gave me something to eat, I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink, I was a stranger and you invited me in, I needed clothes and you clothed me, I was sick and you looked after me, I was in prison and you came to visit me. Jesus identifies himself with the imprisoned. When we advocate for prisoners of conscience, we serve Christ himself. Hebrews 133 instructs, continue to remember those in prison as if you were together with them in prison, and those who are mistreated as if you yourselves were suffering. We are called not merely to acknowledge the suffering of the imprisoned but to feel it as our own. Pastor Jeon's suffering should weigh on the conscience of every believer. Isaiah 117 commands: learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow. Pastor Jeon is oppressed by a government that has declared war on religious expression. He needs advocates who will plead his case. James 2:15-17 warns, suppose a brother or a sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, "Go in peace, keep warm and well fed," but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. Faith demands action. Sympathy without advocacy is empty. Pastor June needs more than prayers, he needs people of influence to act on his behalf. Coach Tuberville, you have declared your Christian faith publicly. You have said that you believe in God and in the sanctity of life. Now a brother in Christ, a servant of God who has devoted 50 years to the gospel, is dying in prison. His crime was speaking out for the same values you hold dear. Will your faith be accompanied by action? Will you speak for those who cannot speak for themselves? Specific requests. Coach Tuberville, I respectfully request your assistance in the following specific ways. First, I ask that you issue a public statement expressing concern about the imprisonment of Pastor Jeon Kwang-hoon and calling for his immediate release on humanitarian grounds. Your voice carries weight as a United States Senator, a member of the Armed Services Committee, and a prominent Christian public figure. A statement from you would draw international attention to this case and put pressure on the Korean government. Second, I ask that you bring this matter to the attention of President Trump directly. Pastor Jeon has been one of President Trump's most vocal supporters in Asia. He has praised President Trump as a leader sent by God and has organized massive rallies in support of American policies. President Trump should know that one of his most loyal international supporters is being persecuted. A word from the president to the Korean government could save Pastor Jeon's life. Third, I ask that you raise this issue in the Senate Armed Services Committee. The persecution of pro-American voices in allied nations directly affects American security interests. The Lee administration's efforts to dismantle the U.S. Korea alliance should be a matter of concern to the committee, and Pastor Jeon's imprisonment is a symptom of a broader anti-American agenda. Fourth, I ask that you consider sponsoring or co-sponsoring a Senate resolution condemning religious persecution in South Korea and calling for Pastor Jeon's release. Such a resolution would put the Korean government on notice that the United States Congress is watching, and will hold Korea accountable for its treatment of religious minorities. Fifth, I ask that you request that the State Department investigate the religious freedom situation in South Korea, and include findings on Pastor Jeon's case in its annual International Religious Freedom Report. Sixth, if possible, I would be honored to have the opportunity to brief you or your staff directly on this case. I am prepared to travel to Washington, D.C., at my own expense to provide additional information and answer any questions. Conclusion. Coach, help US win this game. Coach Tuberville, I have written to 25 American leaders before you. Senator Lindsey Graham, Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, President Donald Trump, Senator Ashley Moody. Not one has responded. Not one has acknowledged that an innocent man of God is dying in a Korean prison. I am writing to you because you are different. You are a coach. You know what it means to fight for your team when no one believes you can win. You know what it means to stand alone for principle when the entire establishment opposes you. You know what it means to bring a team from behind to victory. Pastor Jeon Kwang-hoon is also a coach. His rallying cry is, "Let us unite. Let us fight. Let us win." For 7 years, he led his team, hundreds of thousands of Korean patriots, in peaceful rallies for freedom and the U.S. Korea alliance. Now he is imprisoned, his health failing, his voice silenced. His team needs him back on the field. I am asking you to join our team, Coach Tuberville. Speak out for Pastor Jeon. Use your platform to draw attention to his case. Help us win this game, not a game of points and victories, but a game where the stakes are a man's life and the future of religious freedom in South Korea. Your father fought at Normandy so that people could live in freedom. Pastor Jeon is fighting, with his failing body, from a prison cell, for the same cause. Honor your father's memory, honor your faith, honor the alliance that American blood has secured. Free Pastor Jeon Kwang-hoon. I eagerly await your response. May God bless you, Coach Tuberville, and may God bless the United States of America. With deepest respect and urgent appeal, Kim Sun-gi.